6,000 starving, barely armed Scottish peasants standing in a muddy field, staring down 20,000 of the most feared warriors in all of Europe. Heavy cavalry that had crushed armies across the continent. Longbowmen whose arrows could pierce plate armor like paper. The finest military machine the medieval world had ever seen. And leading them? A king without a kingdom. Excommunicated by the church. Mocked by every nobleman in England as a pretender and a fool. This wasn't a battle. This was supposed to be a massacre. Yet somehow, impossibly, by the end of that blood-soaked day in June 1314, the English would be running for their lives, drowning in rivers, trampled by their own horses, and Robert the Bruce would cement his name in history forever. This is the story of Bannockburn, and trust me, it's way more insane than you think. Let's set the stage here, because you need to understand just how hopeless things looked for Scotland. This wasn't some fair fight between equals. By 1314, Scotland basically didn't exist anymore as an independent nation. King Edward I of England, who they literally called the Hammer of the Scots, had spent years brutally beating Scotland into submission. He forced every Scottish noble to either bend the knee and swear loyalty to England or face execution, and he wasn't bluffing. When William Wallace tried to lead a resistance, Edward had him dragged through the streets, hanged, drawn, and quartered, and then had pieces of his body displayed across Scotland as a warning. The message was clear. Scotland is ours now, and if you resist, this is what happens to you. By any reasonable measure, Scotland was finished. But then comes Robert the Bruce, this Scottish nobleman who had a claim to the Scottish throne. Now here's where it gets wild. In 1306, Bruce straight up murdered his main rival inside a church. Like, actually stabbed him to death in a holy building, which back then was considered one of the worst sins you could possibly commit. And what does Bruce do after committing this sacrilege? He has himself crowned King of Scotland. The audacity of this move is insane. The English are laughing at him. He's got no real army. He controls basically no territory, and the church has excommunicated him. He's literally a king of nothing. But Bruce refused to quit. For the next 8 years, he waged this brilliant guerrilla campaign, recapturing castles one by one, avoiding any big open battles where England's superior forces could crush him, just slowly, methodically wearing down the English occupiers. By 1314, he controlled almost all of Scotland except for one crucial fortress, Stirling Castle. Now Stirling wasn't just any castle. This place was the key to everything. It sat right at the gateway between the Scottish Highlands in the north and the lowlands in the south. Control Stirling, and you control Scotland. Bruce's brother Edward had been besieging the castle for months, and eventually the English commander inside made a deal. He said, look, if an English army doesn't show up to rescue us by June 24th, we'll surrender the castle peacefully. On the surface, this seemed like a reasonable agreement, but here's the thing. This deal was actually a trap, and the English were about to walk right into it. Because King Edward II of England absolutely could not let Stirling fall without putting up a fight. Can you imagine the humiliation? The son of the Hammer of the Scots just letting Scotland slip away? No chance. So Edward assembled the largest English army in years. We're talking 20,000 men. 20,000. Among them were 2,500 heavy cavalry, the elite shock troops of medieval warfare. Guys in full plate armor on massive war horses that had crushed every enemy they'd ever faced. 3,000 Welsh longbowmen whose arrows could punch through armor at 200 yards, and thousands more infantry backing them up. The English were confident this was it. They were going to march north, relieve Stirling Castle, and crush this Scottish rebellion once and for all. But Robert the Bruce knew exactly what was coming, and he'd been preparing for months. He chose his battlefield very carefully. A narrow strip of land squeezed between the Bannockburn River on one side and the dense forests of the new park on the other. This terrain was perfect for Bruce because it meant the English couldn't use their superior numbers. They couldn't spread out and flank him. Their cavalry couldn't maneuver. Bruce took it even further. His men dug thousands of small holes across the likely approach routes, covered them with branches and grass, creating invisible traps that would snap a horse's leg the moment it stepped wrong. And he trained his soldiers in a formation called the schiltron, tight circles of men holding 12-foot-long spears, essentially turning themselves into human hedgehogs that were nearly impossible for cavalry to break through. June 23rd, the English arrived, and right away, we get this absolutely legendary moment. An English knight named Henry de Bohun spotted Robert the Bruce riding out ahead of the Scottish lines, armed only with a battle axe and sitting on this small horse. De Bohun saw his chance for eternal glory. He lowered his lance and charged at the Scottish king at full speed. Everyone watching thought Bruce was dead, but as de Bohun thundered toward him, Bruce just calmly rode forward on his little pony. At the last possible second, Bruce swerved aside, and as the English knight roared past him, Bruce stood up in his stirrups and brought his axe down in a single devastating blow. The axe split de Bohun's helmet and skull completely in half, though the handle shattered from the impact. There was this moment of stunned silence, and then the Scots just erupted in cheers. Their king had just killed an English champion in single combat. The psychological impact was enormous. That night, the English commanders debated what to do. Some wanted to wait, rest the troops, find better ground. But Edward was impatient. The deadline to relieve Stirling was the next day, and he wasn't about to look weak. He ordered the attack for morning. It would prove to be a fatal mistake. June 24th, dawn. The English army advanced, and immediately they ran into problems. They had to cross the Bannockburn and squeeze through this narrow corridor of land that Bruce had chosen. The English heavy cavalry led the way because that's what always worked. You smash into the enemy with your armored knights. They panic and run, and then you cut them down as they flee. Except the Scots didn't run. The schiltrons held firm, and when that first wave of English cavalry crashed into that wall of spears, it was carnage. Horses screamed and fell, throwing their riders. The knights behind them couldn't stop in time and plowed into the chaos. More horses stumbled into Bruce's hidden pits, breaking legs, throwing more armored men into the mud. And here's the thing about a knight in full armor. If he falls off his horse, he basically can't get up. The armor's too heavy, so these elite warriors are just lying there helpless while the battle rages around them. The English archers tried to help, but the terrain was too narrow and the armies were too close together. They couldn't shoot without hitting their own men, and some of their arrows were literally striking English soldiers. Bruce saw this and sent his 500 light cavalry straight at the archers. Without the heavy cavalry there to protect them, the archers broke and ran. For hours, the battle ground on. The English kept pressing forward, packed together on this narrow strip of land. At the front, men were desperately fighting against those walls of spears. Behind them, thousands more couldn't even fight. They were just pushing forward because there was nowhere else to go. The heat was unbearable. Men in full armor were collapsing from exhaustion. Bodies piled up so high that soldiers were literally climbing over mountains of corpses. Then Bruce threw in his reserves, fresh troops under Angus Og, and at the same moment, something appeared on a nearby hill. It was the Scottish baggage train, servants and camp followers armed with whatever they could find. But to the exhausted English, it looked like another entire army arriving. Someone shouted treason. Others screamed retreat. Panic spread like wildfire. King Edward's bodyguards practically dragged him off the field, and once the king was fleeing, the whole army collapsed. Men threw away their weapons, their armor, anything that would slow them down. They plunged into the Bannockburn trying to swim across, and many drowned under the weight of their equipment. Others were cut down by pursuing Scots. When it was over, more than 4,000 English soldiers were dead. Dozens of nobles were captured. Bruce collected so much ransom money that it financed his kingdom for years. Scottish casualties? Fewer than 500. It wasn't just a victory. It was complete annihilation. Bannockburn proved that England wasn't invincible, that discipline and tactics could overcome raw numbers and superior equipment. Robert the Bruce was now undeniably the King of Scotland. England would try for years to reconquer Scotland, but after Bannockburn, the momentum was broken. In 1328, they finally gave up and officially recognized Scottish independence. 6,000 Scots had done the impossible.